Okay, good afternoon. We'll wait 1 second for people to come on. All right, I don't know if everybody's watching this or not, but it's a disastrous day on Wall Street, but one of the most fascinating days I've ever seen. We'll talk about GameStop in a second, but truly some remarkable things happening today in the market. And, we have 5 straight Dow's longest losing streak since 2020, obviously last year. This may have been, I've talked many times about a potential drop, a dip at some point. This may be the start of that, but today down 634 points. It was down over 700 points earlier in the day. At some point, this had to happen. Everything went too fast, too far, too fast, and everything was growing. Now, part of that could have been the impact of a stimulus where people had money. I think a large part of that had to do with sites like Robinhood, where a lot more people are investing. Younger people are investing. They're home. They had nothing to do. They started investing. But some truly remarkable things today. And to those that think the stock market is rigged or there's some manipulation, there are things that happen today that will give some credence to that. However, I don't know if that's really the case. So to those that are not familiar with the stock market, at some point in the next day or two, you're going to hear about GameStop. You may hear about AMC as well, but you're primarily going to hear about GameStop. GameStop is that little shop that does video games in malls and strip centers. And they had a stock that just went absolutely absurd crazy today. And to give you some sense of, and you can look this up with me, if you go on, just Google GameStop stock, it is at 347 right now. If you're looking at a chart and you want to look at the last month, for example, on December 31st, the stock was $18.84. So from December 31st to the 27th of January, from $18.84 to $347.51. Now, to put that in perspective, this is a retail store that is in strip malls and regular malls. Logic tells us stores and malls are not doing well. Nothing makes any sense. Macy's, JCPenney, all those stores collapsing. So you have a company at $18 3-4 weeks ago that is now $347.51. It closed at $347.51. And the question is how? What happened? Why is it happening? And the story is actually kind of spectacular. There are companies, primarily large hedge funds, that work. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry to those saying hi. Work in hedge funds that will short a stock. If you're not familiar with the market, you can either buy long or short. Buy long is you're expecting the stock to go up. If you buy short, technically you're borrowing a stock, hoping it goes down and returning the stock, but essentially you're betting the stock will go down. So, for example, if you had Macy's a couple years ago and you thought, man, no one's buying at these stores anymore, I'm going to buy it short. So it went down and you made a lot of money. I don't think I've ever talked about a short that I've done. I don't buy a lot of stock short. That's a little riskier, but I can't think of one that I've done. I know this morning I bought Cinemark at I think 27 and sold it at 23. So I did buy that short in about a 20-minute trade. In general, I don't like to do that. This was just so obvious this morning. That said, typically your large short position holders are hedge funds, large companies that are betting this thing is going down. So on Reddit, there's a page on Reddit. I forgot what it's exactly called, something about trading or what have you. And they talk about ideas, and it's amazing. They apparently have enough followers on that page and enough people with some money behind them that when they decide to go after something, they can get enough people to buy it at the same time. And they have decided over the last couple weeks, what have you, month, whatever, to go after stocks that had a high short interest. For example, I think about a month ago, they went after Kodak, and Kodak went crazy. So they announced yesterday that they wanted to go after this and go after the short interest there, and which meant everybody going and buy it at the same time. And so they did it. And yesterday the stock went, I'm going to pull this up again, from 76.79 to 147.98. And then today they did the same thing, and it went from 147.98 to now 347.51. And this is just a bunch of people on an online page saying, hey, let's all buy this at the same time. The problem is there may not be anything illegal about that. Typically what's illegal is when people work together to manipulate a stock, which means, one, you either lie about the stock. So you have a lot of things called pump and dumps, which is, let's suppose I want you to buy stock ABC, but I'll go on Branford 7 and on Wall Street Journal. I'll post on a bunch of these forums. ABC is going to go and put false information out there so people think it's going to pop. I buy a bunch of it before I do that. I put all this false information out. Everybody buys it. The stock triples, and then I sell like crazy. That's illegal. That's manipulating a stock. Purposely buying a stock in large volumes so people see it and say, wow, there's something there, let me buy it, is also illegal. It's manipulating the market. There is nothing hiding here. Like, they're out in the open. They're posting publicly on Reddit, hey, let's all go in and buy this stock. We have no fundamental reason to buy this stock. It's not like we expect it to be a really good company. It's not like we expect anything positive. Let's just do it. So there's nothing hiding. So the question is, if there's nothing hiding, how do you go after that company? They're not manipulating anything. Here, this is what we're doing. I'm about to buy it. They buy it. And so it's going to be a fascinating question on what the SEC does, what our regulatory system does. But it just shows, if you're going to get into the market in general, if you are a novice, buy mutual funds, please. Individual stocks, you have to follow this. You have to know what's going on. I got up this morning, I was looking at the headlines, it's just kind of blown away. But that's a little bit of background on what happened. It was manipulated by a Reddit page, and they've been doing that. And they did it also to AMC today. AMC has no right going up. AMC, so about, a month ago or so, I looked at both AMC and Cinemark. When HBO announced, or Warner Brothers announced they were putting their movies from the theater and also on HBO, Cinemark and AMC collapsed. I look at both stocks. I purchased Cinemark because it was in better financial shape. AMC is a disaster. They actually just took on some money. It should have gone down. Instead, it skyrocketed today, kind of the same story. So it's interesting to see. And what's happening now, which is interesting, is now people are saying, wait a minute, they're going after stocks that are heavily shorted. So let's go find stocks that are heavily shorted, because that'll be the next stocks that they go attack. And so you're seeing some of those stocks start rise up. It's amazing how this manipulation is happening. Is it good for the market? Typically, no. The market survives on fundamentals. Typically a good company will have demand, bad company won't, and it'll drop. When you have stuff like this happening, from an investor standpoint, we don't wonder if it's good or bad. We just wonder, how do we play it? How do we make sure we're protected against it or take advantage of it? So that's the rundown today. You're going to see that on the news everywhere. It's just absolutely crazy. Facebook tanking. I must have had bad, not a very good earnings quarter. So that's spectacular about GameStop, and it's interesting to look at what's going on. The second thing I want to talk about today, we will get to either today or maybe it goes into tomorrow, on the national debt. We've had a lot of emails on that, some comments on it. And it is something we should talk about because it's used constantly in a political context. Does a national debt matter? And so we'll talk about whether it does or not, whether it does in comparison to other issues. For example, does it matter now when we have this huge financial crisis happening? What's more important, stimulating the economy in the short term or the debt long term? That's a discussion that we have to have. Before we get there, though, I want to get to an article today by Kevin Rennie in the Hartford Courant. And I think this article was posted over the weekend. And it says, Kevin Rennie, as Governor Lamont legislators debate whether to cut or increase taxes, remember who pays the bill. Now, Kevin Rennie is a columnist. They're all analysis in his personal opinion. And he has been fairly negative. He's a former Republican or former Republican elected official. He's kind of one of those like Page 6 kind of writers where here's behind the scenes and, who was wearing what at what ball kind of thing, but only in politics. And so last week, Sean Scanlon put out a plan to increase child tax credits for most people in the state. Didn't necessarily limit the income they can make. In some cases, people were making far more money. It did have a step system, I think, later on. In general, when a bill is first introduced, it is not the final bill. It's expecting negotiations. It's just the idea that's put forward. The same applies for that 1% tax that people are talking about on the so-called mansion tax. Hold off, relax. That's probably not going very far, at least at that number. But when a session starts, everybody puts these things forward to start the discussion. Politically, the opponents say, "Oh my God, they put this thing forward to change the world." For example, last year or 2 years ago, someone put forward that bill that became big politically that talked about regionalizing school districts. And was it ever going to happen? No. Did the final bill that got out of committee anywhere close to that? No. Did it ever get voted on by the full legislature? No. But it became a huge political football that was used on a regular basis. So going back to that proposal on child tax credits, initial proposal up for debate, has to happen. But Kevin Rennie writes that basically Sean Scanlon doesn't know who pays the bills and Lamont has to pay the bills and stop raising her taxes kind of article. But there's one line in here I want to read. And it's, I want to just read it from the article. It says a $450 million tax credit would take some budget juggling. Scanlon is the new co-chair of the legislature's tax committee, so he will enjoy plenty of opportunities to make his pitch to Lamont when budget negotiations commence in the spring. Lamont should not underestimate Scanlon, who won a big prize when Shoreline Democrats gave him a cushy patronage job as executive director of Tweed New Haven Airport. It allows Scanlon plenty of time to sell his proposal and pursue his ambition to run for state comptroller in 2022. Now, Sean has not announced that he's running for comptroller. Sean is clearly someone who is seeking higher office. That's not a surprise to anyone. I think he's kind of taken a step back a little bit from that and having a baby the last year and getting married, buying a house, all that kind of stuff. But he's a career politician. We know that. He's a good guy. He represents our district. If you're in Brantford and Guilford. The issue I have with this statement is Lamont should not underestimate Scanlon. Now, first of all, this idea that is basically, oh my God, Scanlon's got some serious weight. Give me a break. But that Lamont should be threatened in any way is nonsense. Who won a big prize when Shoreline Democrats gave him a cushy patronage job as executive director of Tweed New Haven Airport. Rennie also wrote last year that was the case, a cushy patronage job in getting this job at the airport. It's about a $100,000 a year job. It's a significant job. The question is, what experience does he have at airports? Here's the problem with columnists writing nonsense like this. Sean Scanlon was actually the perfect pick for that job because the job of a Tweed director is to deal with the neighborhood to get the runway extended, get funding from the state and federal government to get the runway extended, potentially move the location of the terminal, and two, get airlines in there. Sean Scanlon, before he was state representative, worked for Chris Murphy. He is incredibly well connected to high-level politicians and individuals. The skill we want are those connections. The ability to work with the public, the ability to get funding from the state and federal government, and the ability to get someone on the phone when you start calling those airlines. Having Chris Murphy, having Blumenthal, having high-level officials in Washington is absolutely huge. So Rennie said this a year ago and then repeats it again this weekend. The fact of the matter is he's completely full of shit. Because there's very few people that have the connections Sean Scanlon has in that position. No airport director with all the experience in the world of running an airport is going to be skilled in working with the neighborhood, working with the people surrounding that airport, getting the money to get that runway extended, and getting contacts through airlines to get them to come in there. But this is where columnists add to the crap and the vitriol and the nonsense and the false information we see all the time. This is a Hartford Courant columnist, a former elected official, saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. At some point, we as readers have to say, shut up, shove it. And the real question I have is, what's the responsibility of the Hartford Courant? Did anybody at the Hartford Courant stop and say, should we make sure this is true? Let's interview Sean Scanlon and ask. Let's interview the committee and find out why they chose him. Did anybody stop and say, wait a minute, he's been in there for almost a year. Let's see what job he's done, what contacts he's made, what he's moved forward. I know people who are at those meetings on a regular basis that he runs. They're quite impressed with him. He's done a good job. He's spectacular at working with the public. He's very good with working with people of both sides of the aisle. Now, I've been critical of Sean Scanlon on things like marijuana and some other laws he's put forward. This isn't the area to be critical. Where we should be critical are the people writing these nonsense articles that don't know their ass from their elbow. And over and over again, this is what journalism has become. If you watch MSNBC or Fox News, there's not news being portrayed. It's analysis and one person's opinion going over and over again, pretending to be news. This podcast isn't news. It's a discussion. You can ask questions. I'll respond. It's my opinion. It's my knowledge. And if it's wrong, you can combat it. That's the reason we do it live. I'm not pretending to be news. If I write an article and present the source documents and facts, that's news. Kevin Rennie's a columnist. And at some point, just repeating the same nonsense doesn't make it true. But that's clearly the goal of that columnist. To push an agenda. To attack what was nowhere close to a cushy patronage job. You want that job? Deal with the public on extending that runway. Cushy? I don't think so. Look online and see the things people talked about expanding that runway. Look at the battle going on between Tweed and Bridgeport on what airline should go in there, who should be expanded, and who should get state money. If you're Tweed, and you're the director at Tweed, wouldn't you want somebody who has access to people where the money comes from? Access to high-level officials at the state and federal level? Someone whose phone calls will be returned when they call American Airlines or United or the top-level airlines? Kevin Rennie doesn't know what he's talking about. At some point, it's up to us as consumers and the Hartford Courant to say enough already. And I wanted to get that off my chest because we talked about this a little bit a year ago, and he just keeps repeating the same crap. Sean Scanlon should be in that position. He's not in that position because of his connections to the board. He's in that position because of his connections to different levels of government and his ability to work with the public, which is exactly what that position called for. Okay, now, before we go, hold on here. All right, I want to read some of these comments that come in. Yes, BlackBerry had that. That's true. Nokia is interesting today. I actually looked at buying Nokia. It's popping for no reason, but it didn't pop a significant amount. Like usually when there's a pop, like for a pump and dump, it goes from 2 to 8. Nokia didn't. So I don't know what's going on there. Jeff Follett, how are you? Talk about someone who knows finances. Jeff Follett's on the board of finance. Ray Ingraham. Steve, it was an opinion piece. Kevin Rennie is a columnist. But at some point, repeating the same opinion with no evidence is a problem. And if you don't think that's true, we have had an issue in our country over the last few months of statements that were untrue, repeated ad nauseum, and it caused some significant problems. Mary, that's got to be tough as Marty Looney lives in Tweed Airport neighborhood. It's interesting you bring up Looney because today at breakfast, somebody came in and was asking, Democrat versus Republican and Scanlon versus Looney or something. But our state legislature isn't really about Democrat versus Republican. Our state legislature is about inner city versus suburbs. And that's why that 1% tax that's proposed by Looney probably isn't going very far. More than anything, that's the war you're seeing happen right now. Part of that is because Democrats in the inner city are starting that war. They're making everything about economics or race if they can, or we're seeing this over and over again that they are, we need more money and it has to come from the suburbs. Now, the response to that is, what are you spending your money on? If you want more of Branford's money, more of Guilford's money, more of Madison's money, then I want to see your books. I want some say in how you're spending that money. I get to vote in Branford, therefore I have a say in how Branford spends its money. If more of our money is going to go from Branford to New Haven, I want some say in how New Haven spends its money. How many management levels do they have? What are their revenue sources? What's happening? Part of that 1%, Tim Larson was the executive director before Tweed. Yes, before Sean on Tweed. Part of that 1%. So Martin Looney put forth a bill asking for a 1% property tax, which is A property tax at a state level is not something we do right now. Usually property tax goes to the individual towns. A 1% property tax on houses worth over about $435,000 that would go towards, I don't know, some fund to fund pilot. Pilot is PILOT, it's an acronym. And pilot funds stands for payment in lieu of taxes. There is a fund at the state that refunds all towns, New Haven, but also Brantford and what have you, on properties that avoid property taxes for whatever reason. So it could be not typically churches, but it could be a nonprofit organization owns it, or there was some tax incentive to come into the town and develop business in the area or what have you. And so those towns don't get that property tax revenue, and therefore the goal was that the state would reimburse some of those monies in what's called pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. They've almost never funded that. Or if they did, it drop, and it's significantly underfunding. So what Looney wants to do is take that, Ray Ingraham is correct, 1 mil, well, 1 mil? Yeah. All right, that 1 mil tax and fund pilot, knowing most of that money ends up flowing to the inner cities. And think about it for a second. A town like New Haven, a city like New Haven has Yale, which owns half of the city, doesn't pay any taxes. They give some money in other areas, but doesn't pay any taxes. So I kind of get the need to say, wait a minute, our suburbs, the towns around New Haven, benefit greatly by being near New Haven, right? Half of Brantford works at Yale, and it's either the school or the medical or the hospital in some way, shape, or form. So are property values in Brantford and Guilford and Madison propped up because of Yale? Yeah. Is there a demand for some of those things because of Yale? Certainly there is. Not completely because of that. We watched during this pandemic, all those New York residents flow into Connecticut who likely work in New York. So that was because they're on a train line. They're on 95. They have transportation to the city to work when we get back to work. So it's not always Yale, but Yale has a significant impact. If we had no Yale in New Haven, if we didn't have all the tax-free buildings we have in New Haven, many of the people who have jobs in these suburbs wouldn't have them. So the logic is not all that faulty. The response to that should be then, wait a minute, if we're going to be taxed on our property and it goes to New Haven or goes to pilot and then goes to New Haven, whether it's redirected or direct, doesn't really matter, what say do we have in how New Haven spends its money? And I've raised this point up with ECS funding before. ECS funding is cost education, is education dollars that goes to towns. And the state should ask the same thing. We are giving you, as part of payback to our towns, Brantford's about $1.9 million a year. Does the state have any right to say, well, let's make sure you're not wasting money? Or is it just give us the money and we decide how it goes? I don't know the answer to that. But it makes sense to me that before I fund something, I'd like to know that at least maybe I wouldn't agree with every penny and how it's spent, but have some say in how that money is dispersed, what they're choosing to spend money on. Are they spending money on decrepit buildings? Are they spending on books they don't need? Are they spending money on excessive staffing? A question in Brantford, are we adding too many administrators? That's a question pretty much anywhere. All of these questions should be asked. And we expect as a town that we ask that question. But if the state's giving us $1.9 million, should they have a say and say, listen, we want some standards here. We don't want 47 assistant superintendents. We don't want a director of pupils and a director of this and a director of this and a director of this and 2 assistant principals in most of the school. All of the stuff that we just keep adding administration to, should there be some limit to that? Likewise, Brantford residents should be able to say, wait a minute, if money on our property tax is somehow being rediverted to, whether directly or through pilot, to New Haven, I want to say in how New Haven is spending its money. I want to say, make sure they're not wasting money with ridiculous levels of management, ridiculous benefits, whatever it is, before here's some more of our money. And that's a bigger question. And that's why the big political issue isn't Democrat versus Republican in Connecticut. It is election time. But the big political issue in Connecticut is our cities versus our suburbs. And we've talked many, many times. It also applies to the affordable housing discussion. Usually it's the inner cities who are leading that discussion about getting affordable housing, their definition, not actual affordable housing, their definition of affordable housing, into other towns to move some of those residents out. And to get it, they'll yell about race because that's just what they do. So that being said, I actually went through a bunch of stuff pretty quickly today. I don't know if I'm talking faster than usual or what the case is, but tomorrow we will try to get to the national debt. I know I actually had some really good back and forth with some comments on that. You know, it's used constantly politically, but our debt is soaring and our debt is soaring. And it is my opinion that the debt doesn't mean nearly as much as most people think it does. The real question is, what does that debt compare to the current crisis and the need for more stimulus? And then the further question is, if we care about the debt, the same people who are caring about the debt now when we're asking for stimulus also care about the debt when we're passing tax cuts during a strong economic period in Trump's first year. And then you have this same argument that we have to ask all the time is, what is our financial philosophy, our economic philosophy? Do we believe in supply side, the trickle down, or the demand side, the Keynesian economics, that is, you give money to those on the lower levels and it'll stimulate an economy? And we'll talk about that in a little more detail tomorrow. But it all plays a role. And when we start looking at individual issues and quotes given by politicians and political points, understanding the bigger picture often helps us understand those smaller points being made. We'll talk about that in greater detail and how it relates to the stimulus tomorrow. All right, so that'll wrap it up for today. I want to thank you for joining me. I apologize it was not on yesterday. I struggled today. For some reason, I was absurdly tired. I actually stopped and took a nap for about a half hour this afternoon. But I'm glad to be back on, and I will be back on tomorrow at 4 o'clock if all our electronics works or what have you. Thanks for joining me. I will see you tomorrow, guys. Have a great night.